Alexey Muraviev is an Associate Professor of National Security and Strategic Studies at Curtin University, and he joins us now from Perth in Australia. Well, Europe has had several years now to wean themselves off Russian gas. None of this can come as a surprise. So overall, what kind of impact will it have? Is there any risk that the lights get switched off?
Well, I think the impact, if any, will be targeted. As your report also highlighted, there are countries in Europe, especially those that are landlocked, they don't have maritime access, that would probably suffer more than other countries that can effectively substitute Russia's exports by bringing in LNG gas in tankers, for example, from the United States. Two countries that come to mind is Slovakia and Austria, because 60% of their supplies traditionally have been covered by the Russian experts, and they are the ones obviously that have concerns. But I would imagine, as you just mentioned, it's not a breaking news. It's something that's been in the works. It's something that Europe has been preparing itself for. So I think the Europeans probably considered alternative options on how maneuver energy resources within Europe. It would also depend on the weather conditions and linked to that the consumption of gas and how full the reserves of LNG stockpiles are in Europe. So a mix of factors will come into the equation, including alternative ways of delivery. And your report also suggested the Blue Stream, the Turkish stream that bypasses Turkey and transits Russian gas into southern Europe.
Do you think there have been any lessons learnt in Europe about energy security over the last few years, about that over-reliance that it had on Russian gas? Or are market forces, cheap supplies and consumer needs still king?
Well, it very much depends on from which position you're going to look at. If the position is purely business, then obviously the Russians provide a very competitive case in terms of quantities and prices that they are charging. If it's about geopolitics of pipelines, it's about the greater power game and geopolitical maneuvering, then obviously the Europeans understand that their overdependence on Russia make them not only less resilient to Russia's pressures, but also more dependent on Russia's energy supplies. And obviously, it's part of Putin's long-standing dream of trying to create a sort of, in his view, a unified Europe where he would merge Europe's financial sector, European technologies with Russia's energy resources, and then create this conglomerate that would withstand the pressure of economic competitiveness against either the United States or China. Obviously, this dream is no longer there. And Europeans will no longer pursue it. But they obviously have this difficulty in living through this transition period, because when you have become so dependent on the steady and uninterrupted supply of cheap energy resources, and you design your economy accordingly, and now that you have to basically improvise. I mean, look what sort of impact it has, for example, on the industrial strength of Germany, where there are layoffs, when there are some industries that have been shut down, not just because of the suspension of the exports of Russia's or imports of Russian gas, but certainly is one of the contributing factors that led to the outcome. So I think the Europeans lived in the comfort zone for a very long time, and now they try to kind of maneuver and scramble for alternatives.
Yeah, as you say, businesses and consumers have had to pay quite a price for this in some cases. Obviously, this pipeline was about transiting gas through Ukraine. But what about energy security in Ukraine itself as we go forward into 2025? It has had a difficult time in terms of safety of its energy supplies coming under bombing. But if it loses large areas of its territory to Russia, if it's forced to cede that, doesn't it also risk losing some of its own gas fields to Russia?
not just gas fields, but also key coal mines, for example, that would be critical to sustain, for example, Ukraine's steel manufacturing and production. Also, we need to remember, as your report suggested, that Russia will lose some significant earnings, 6.5 billion, what Gazprom will lose in now not having access to the European consumers. But we need to remember that Ukraine was also earning money as a transit state. Last year, it earned about 800 million US dollars in letting Russian gas transiting through its territory, and that's a significant income earner for the Ukrainian budget. Now the Ukraine will no longer have this money, and also as been mentioned in the report, up until now, that's one of the paradoxes of this war. Up until now, neither the Ukrainians nor the Russians deliberately attacked the pipeline transit network. It's almost remained immune for the duration of this 3-year plus conflict. If it's no longer going to be in use and the Russians would basically decide that Ukraine is no longer to be considered as a transit state, yes, they may start attacking transit infrastructure, making it impossible for anyone to effectively use it. Well, I don't think it will happen tomorrow, because I think, as Russia's President Vladimir Putin indicated, the Russians are willing to entertain options of effectively creating a situation when gas that would be transited by Russia through Ukraine will be owned by someone else, and by default will consider it to be non-Russian. But if the position of Kiev will remain sort of unwilling to entertain that option, well, the Russians may decide that Ukraine should no longer be remain a transit state. As a result, they may start attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and as a result, yes, Ukraine will slide further and more deeper into the energy crisis. Currently, Ukraine's energy grid is very much dependent on the work of nuclear stations, because the Russians attack everything else. And it becomes more and more dependent of not being a transit state and a sort of a supporter of the provision of energy resources to Europe, rather than the importer of energy resources, and perhaps from now on gas and other forms of oil, and that's going to be a very difficult situation that Ukrainians will face this year and from now on.
All right, Alexey Muraviev, thank you so much for your insight on the News Hour. Much appreciated.